I am quite awed by the mind power, the talent that I see before my eyes this evening. I recall that when Arjun had to get into the war, he actually said that Mukham cha parishishyati, my throat is going dry out of fear. I mean, to have Claude Alvarez and Peter D'Souza, that by itself is enough for. But to have so many distinguished writers, Dakshinayan friends, scholars, I feel overwhelmed by the hospitality and the warmth of your invitation and your patience and determination to come here even when it is raining outside. Thank you so much. I want to particularly thank the president and the secretary of this society center for scientific study of myth and culture. Myth by itself is a challenge for us in India. For the Greeks, it is not such a challenge because the Greeks had a convenient way of cutting the slice of existence into ethos and mythos. Ethos admitted the laws of time and space, and mythos, like our virtual space today, which we visit 22 hours out of 24 hours a day, was free of time and space. So the logics were different. One was logical, one had causality, and the other was mythological. And it had no causality, but it was full of consequences, and in most cases, terrible consequences. Aristotle, while distributing the Greek corpus of literature, had no difficulty in saying, well, there is tragedy, there is comedy, there is epic, and there is lyric. Because for him, epic was a poem which begins in the middle of the action, which has a divine intervention, which is about a single hero, which concludes with some great triumph or a kind of a happy ending. For us, to decide what is an epic in itself is a difficulty. When the Sanskrit scholars did strive to define what is a sargabandha, that is, bringing together so many sargas brought together, because several of those epics have kalpas, sargas, and so on. But even the idea of sargabandha, that is the so-called epic, that let's say the 7th century Sanskrit criticism accepted and allowed critics, literary critics up to the 13th century to accept that idea, did not actually pass the scrutiny in terms of the literary production that we had. And therefore, in the middle of that period when this theory of Sargabandha as an epic was accepted in respectable circles of scholars, a 9th, 10th century thinker, Rajashekhar, I think he was probably born in this part of the country, then migrated to Python and so on. Though I'm not sure, it's only the archive department in Goa will be able to tell us where Rajashekhar was born. But going by his wisdom, I'm convinced that he was born in Goa. That is extremely perceptive, extremely perceptive. In his Kavya Mimamsa, he says, look, boss, I mean, he didn't say boss, but look, there are two types of histories. two types of histories. One is of a single hero, and the other is of many heroes. The example of the first, this is what Rajashekar is saying, is Ramayana. The example for the illustration for the second is the Mahabharata. Now, for Rajashekar, the Mahabharata was not an epic history. It was not an epic for a Western critic because it did not have a single hero. So the Mahabharata neither admits description as an epic, either in the tradition of Indian tradition of Sargabandha or in the Western tradition of epics. So what is it then? My friend, who is no more, one of the most brilliant poets, I think, A.K. Ramanujan, once said, everybody in India knows the Mahabharata because nobody reads it. He was, I'm sure each one of you knows the Mahabharata. Don't tell me. Except for the scholars in the Bhandarkar Institute. Nobody. And there is a taboo about it. The taboo is you cannot put all the volumes of the Mahabharata inside your house. So, I do not know the root of this strange belief. So what is the Mahabharata? It's not an epic, as the classical definitions of epic in world criticism go. It is not a Sargabandha, which has a sequential story of great triumph. What is it? Rajashekar says it is history, and one element of the Mahabharata itself claims it is itihasa. Itihasa. The term itihasa, literally, if you had the leisure to sit down and play with those characters, it has been so. Itihasa, practically the same letters. This is how it has been. That is itihasa. One component of the Mahabharata admits that as a description, but the rest of the Mahabharata does not. And that's a problem. That is, the Mahabharata, let's say, I will use the Mahabharata term as if it is a plural. And I'll explain why I'm calling it a plural term, not just a singular. But the one component of the Mahabharata says it is itihas. The rest denies that it is itihas. The difficulty in deciding what it is multiplies. And if we go step by step and start looking at, is it a poem, is it a kavya? Everybody in the Indian tradition of learning, the Sanskrit world of knowledge, Sanskrit universe of knowledge, admitted Ramayana as kavya, but not Mahabharata. So here is a dismissed form of literature, and yet a form of literature that has kept people spellbound for the last at least 2,200 years, ever since it came into a formulation that we know as Mahabharata. It has never ceased to interest writers. People have drawn stories from the Mahabharata. Kalidasa plays entirely dependent on Mahabharata stories. Poems, paintings, songs, the entire Jayadev is drawn upon the Mahabharata. So many new languages took birth by drawing upon the Mahabharata. I speak Marathi as one of my languages, and the very first major poem in Marathi is Jnaneshwari, and it is going back to one component of the Mahabharata, that is the Gita. There is debate about the Gita. I'll come to that a little later. But whether it is Kannada, whether it is Telugu, whether it is Oriya and Bangla, whether it is Gujarati, Hemachandracharya alludes to the Mahabharata, Gujarati. So many modern languages are born as if, I mean, if I were to switch over to Marathi for a sentence, भाषेच्या बारशाला महाभारत असल्याशिवाय त्याचं नावच भाषेचं नाव येऊ शकत नाही. आय मीन इट इज दी महाभारत हॅज every time technology of creative production change from oral to paper technology, which was around the 12th or 13th century, Mahabharata returns there as the first presence. I mean, for every new wedding feast, Mahabharata is the first guest to arrive in our tradition. When we moved from paper technology to print technology, we have Michael Madhusudan Dutt, I mean, Sisupal Vadans. When we move from print technology to television, do you not remember those long Sunday mornings, year after year, you sat before the black and white television watching, this slow-moving Arjuna and Bhima. I mean, Bhima insulted Duryodhana on one Sunday, and at the end of the month, Duryodhana came back. People accepted that as the Mahabharata. It's the same with film industry. When modern theater emerged, I'm not speaking of Konkani, because Konkani theater has probably a different tradition. I'm not fully conversant with that. But I know of this in Kannada, Marathi, and Gujarati. Without having a Draupadi or without having a Karna, no new fashion in literature, poetry, theater, cinema, arts, painting. I come from Baroda, and Raja Ravi Varma was engaged by the Maharaj of Baroda, and most of the figures he drew are from the Mahabharata. Of course, the Ramayana is a close competitor, is a close second to the Mahabharata. So, a work, a kind of a cultural stream, which cannot be named properly in any genre, by using any particular form. What is it that keeps us fascinated for such a long time? Empires have come and gone. I mean, if we were to ask any Indian, and I'm speaking of a nationalist Indian who is proud of the country, who is not a traitor and all that, who's very much proud of, tell the names of kings and emperors for the last 2000 years without faltering. But while we've forgotten those names, we've forgotten, the areas of kingdoms. Where did Audh begin and end? Where did Baroda territory begin and end? Where did, Fulton principality begin and end? But Mahabharata is remembered. I'm saying that nobody reads it. Nobody has defined it. Nobody has described it, despite thousands of books written about the Mahabharata. Thousands of commentators having commented on that. When I was in my childhood in a village somewhere in central Maharashtra, there was a lovely river, and we had a sandy bank, river bank, and somebody, itinerant singers used to come. They would put up a tent, speak on the Mahabharata for 4 or 5 days, and so on, go away. Illiterate. Starkly illiterate. But at least these itinerant, nomadic singers had some contact with the urban life. But later, when I went to Gujarat, started working with tribals, Adivasis, as I call them, on the border of Gujarat and Rajasthan, I found a group among the Garasia Bhils, that is, singing an entire Mahabharata for 2 months with musical instruments made by themselves, treated by them as sacred instruments, and a dance performed with women participating in that dance while the narration was going on. And this narration had not just the music and the dance and words, but also they used to draw various designs according to the episodes. Rangoli type of design done in some natural pigments. Tribals who had not seen what a book is had in them the Mahabharata. I am saying that while empires have come and gone and forgotten, nobody in India seems to forget the Mahabharata. Now, one more question that I place before you for your consideration, and then I move on to what I am expected to say. Because all this while, I only said what you already know. In Europe, when a tension emerged between what is loosely called modernity and what is loosely called tradition, European scholars believe that myth ended and an ironic mode emerged. That is, modernist writers could look at myth, say James Joyce or a T.S. Eliot, not T.S. Eliot so much. T.S. Eliot was a believing Catholic, very religious person, and he had some faith, at, if not in his myths, at least in Indian myths. I say this because it's 2022, and exactly, and we're in October, month of October. Exactly a century ago, T.S. Eliot wrote the last portion of the four quartets, in which he referred to this Brihad Upanishadic story of Prajapati having created the world and all, his three creations, Devas, Danavas, Manavas, dancing and not able to understand the meaning of his dance, etc., etc. And then he asked them, what did I say? And each one tells something differently. Damyata, Dayadvan. That also belongs to the ironic mode. That is, the word of the myth is lost to the modern man. Joyce, in his Ulysses, was not writing about Ulysses of Ithaca, but actually the loss of that wholeness and fragmentation. If it happened in Europe with material conditions that created modernity, material conditions such as probably industrialization, probably urbanization, probably a different structure of the state structure, change relationship between those who are ruled and those who are ruling them, and so many things, and development of science, logic, technology. If that happened in Europe, and if we imbibe those things or develop some of those on our own also here, and if we did not lag behind the rest of the world, why is it that we never entered into this ironic mode and we still continue to be in the mythic mode? Why is it that every time there is a dirty, election, mudslinging, people refer to Duryodhan, Karna, all that, and a nation of now 140 crores. But when these things happen, it was probably 107 or 8 crores or 5 crores. A nation is moved emotionally, psychologically, and alas, politically, by a mere mention of a mythological figure called Prabhu Shri. I didn't say it, you said it. If in the UK Parliament today somebody said Euphrodite or Penelope, would the economic package swing from left to right or center to? It won't. Why is it that we still caught in that tradition of the Mahabharata? Is it our shortcoming? Or is it the greatness of, or some different magic that this Mahabharata tradition has created? This question has fascinated me from my childhood. Not so much the stories in the epic. You all know the stories, and I know. Most of us do not know all the stories so well, but we know some of them. Each one knows some others know some others, yet others know still some other stories. And it's not just our situation. Let's not feel guilty about this, because the state of the condition of the Mahabharata has been like this all along. I'll tell you, just to reassure you, to make you feel less guilty. No, Sudhir Kakkar is not here, but when the Adi Parva, the first book of the Mahabharata, talks about when it was recited the first time. So it was recited according to the first book of the Mahabharata. The Adi Parva says that there was an ashram, a corporate school. A rather strange looking fellow walks in, and his looks are really terrifying looks. And his hair standing straight on his scalp, and eyes bulging out, and he sees those students. They say to him, "Please tell us who you are. Tell us something about." So he tells them a story, and it's a long story. And the story is quite fabulous, it's fascinating. So they all say, "Please say it again." And he tells it again. They say, "But you're not telling us the complete story, tell us the complete story." So this Lomaharshana in the ashram of Ugrashravas is slightly deaf, and yet the story, the owner of the school, the manager of the school, the guru of the school, is slightly deaf, and yet this story appeals to him. And this man says, with a sense of guilt, "Ashtadasha sastrani ashtadasha shatani chaham veti shuko veti sanjaya veti vanava." Look here, I know about 8,000 lines of this story. Shuka knows probably another 8,000. And Sanjay also knows perhaps 8,000. Actually, the wording is wonderful. Sanjay perhaps knows about 8,000. There is a caste politics there. This man who came into the ashram was a tribal. Now Shuka, and Sanjay, who was whose duty was to keep horses. So these are three different social classes, each one knowing approximately one third. Together, this made a story of about 24,000 lines. All this is conclusion drawn much later, but the numbers were mentioned in that Adi Parva shloka, in Adi Parva verse, not shloka. I should not use the term shloka in connection with Mahabharata, because Mahabharata was trying to rebel against shlokas. It was a rebellious text. It was outside the purview of it was outside the arena of the Shastras. It was contemporary of the Shastra. It was the Shastra producing time, and this deliberately remained outside. This 24,000 lines is the first reference to the known version of the Mahabharata, and among those 24,000 lines, there is a reference to a work called Jaya, which is also described as Itihasa. So it is the Itihasa of a Jaya, Itihasa of a conquest. Now, many of us, and not those who are present here, but those who are not present here, often ask about the veracity of this war. When did it take place? Did it take place? There is a railway station called Kurukshetra in Delhi. Did it take place there precisely, or where did it take place? Or did one of the characters there is extremely prolific in human genetics? 100 children, were they really there? No? I must set the context right in order to appreciate what is happening there. And for that, I'll have to step outside the scope of the Mahabharata and go back to Indian history of Indian people. I mentioned the term genetics. Now, I'm not thinking of eugenics. I'm not thinking of purity of race and stuff like that. That is already done by our the late lamented friend Adolf Hitler, and we don't want to repeat what he did. So I'm talking of not. I'm talking of recent development in ancient DNA and study of migration patterns, migrations of earliest humans, the Homo sapiens, not the Homo erectus, not the other homonyms, not the not the similar kind of human-like species, but just this stupid species called which thinks that it is the most intelligent among the animals, and it has described itself as Homo sapiens, the intelligent. My school teacher, used to tease me, because I was dull in class, and the dullest child was called as the, Buddhiman or something like that. So we done that to ourselves, but we survived. We survived, and we survived, perhaps, and I can say this with some degree of confidence. We developed a thing called language, and we weaponized language. We're still weaponizing it in the deadliest possible manner. The worst among the weapons humans developed has been language, and it continues to be so, which I'm using against you at this moment. But allow me. Humans migrated to this part of what we very recently started calling South Asia. Earlier, about a couple of centuries before, the Orient, or whatever, by whatever name you call this part of the globe, from Africa to this part of the world, the first serious migration is 65,000 years before our time. But there have been spells of very cold weather in between. And after a gap of another 20,000 years, 45,000 years before our time, people have come. And subsequently, there is another migration which happened from Iran with agriculture, and yet another migration which happened from, if I were to look at the map of India and look at the countries placed on the top of our head, like Uzbekistan, and 3 or 4 countries, parts east of that, parts west of that, what a political scientist will call the Eurasian steppes. I used to call it steppes. In this migration, there have been seeds of our civilization, because people came, they mixed. In most cases, Indian women and men who came from outside, they mixed, and we all perhaps go back to the same parents, and all of us, irrespective of caste, religion, whatever, we go back there. There have been some major breaks in this story, and we still do not know how to account for those breaks. And one of the major breaks is the Indus civilization ended, and a new kind of thought, lifestyle, and social practice organization emerged. There is a gap of about 500 years. To give you precise dates, the most mature period of the Indus valleys, we call it civilization. There is no word for civilization in Indian languages. It is drawn from Latin civil. In Hindi they call it sabhyata. In Sanskriti is related to receiving impact of the Sanskrit language, Sanskriti. By the way, there is no word for myth in any of the Indian languages. Some people called it Danta Katha, some call it Puran Katha. Kannada poet Adiga, Gopal Krishna Adiga, actually, and I'm addressing this particularly to my dearest friend Dilip Borkar this evening, because he's just returned from a dentist clinic. During the emergency, Adiga wrote a poem called Danta Katha, and it was about it. No, you don't have to speak. Don't. You must. Uh, some call Puran Katha, but none of the stories in the Purana are part of Indian mythos. Our myths are drawn from the Mahabharata, partly from Ramayana, and not from the Puranas at all. Therefore, none of the Indian, what we call myths, are from the. Therefore, we have no word for myth so far. I'll come to that also in a little while. The break between the Indus civilization and what followed has been about 500 years. 2500 years before Christ to 1900 before Christ is the Indus period. After a 500 years period of about which we do not know comes the Rigveda from Indo-Iranian. Armenia is the source place of Rigveda. When it brought at least 300 words from Armenian. I mean, some of the most sacred gods that we think are there in the Rigveda, which is God-given word. If today you look at it, their origin is in Turkey and Syria. Don't tell anybody. But Soma, for instance. Soma. Soma, I mean, if I don't mention Soma in Goa, where else can I do that? Those 500 years are the time when major social shifts were happening. The first urbanization had collapsed in the country. Indus civilization was an urban civilization. It just collapsed. It collapsed because people say because of environmental changes. But I'll not get into that. There are other reasons still yet to be explored. But a nomadic civilization was emerging. In fact, in large parts of Rajasthan, Sindh, even today the nomadic society continues, and that has its roots in that. And here come non-urban, rather imposing, rather aggressive people who back home nearly 1200 to 11 or 1200 years before that had not just the Elamite and Akkadian empires, but in different places in the steppes, had developed a unique technique, and that unique technique was to have a cart drawn by a horse. We had not developed the art of tending horses till then. We were very good with our elephants. The first writing of the Mahabharata has reference to an elephant. Reference to horses comes in the Mahabharata at a later stage when destruction begins. Elephant, because Ganesha broke his tooth, and I'm not talking about you, Dilip. No, why are you not? So, this little weapon of a running cart at a great speed with a sturdy horse, from where an arrow could be thrown, enabled people to go long distance and settle there, and maybe possess the grazing lands and women. And that happened. And it is through that the Sanskrit language arrived here. From 1400 before Christ, while urban civilization had disappeared and a new kind of nomadic society was impacting with a very powerful language the northwestern and the northern parts of central northern parts of India, what happened? Somebody had to remember. 8th century before Christ, that is 600 years later, somebody decided to bring all the oral narratives together. And that became the first Jaya, called Itihasa. This is how it was. This is how it has been. Those stories were bare stories. Not much literary glitter there. No play on words and no metaphors and so on. Simple stories. Genealogies, mixed stories of who were the kings, and no state apparatus, no state formation had taken place. Because these were new people, they were still, they had fire, they had horses, they had soma with them, and they had women, and they were taking cows or giving cows, and it was a different transaction, different market, different social space. After 800, things in India change, and a lot of Eastern Indian civilization started impacting India. One was, of course, Gautam Buddha with his Pali. Another was Mahavir Jain with his Prakrut, or both Pali and Prakrut. And a different philosophy, not Vedic philosophy, no idea of mythos, but just the idea of the ethos. The structure of faith, belief was different. Expectations from the society were different. That clash continued. And that clash continued, resulting in the Vedic, remnants of the Vedic people trying to bring together their strength. Just as in the last week of a month, a young lecturer in a university tries to pull all his monies and scrap papers together to meet both ends. From the Vedas, extracts were created called the Upanishads for certain purposes. Similar extracts were, similar passages were extracted for a slightly more advanced purpose called the Brahmanas. Yet advanced purpose, they were called Aranyakas, but the source was the same. It was a loan from your PF fund. The great works, great, amazing works, and the quality of memory that went into retaining this, they're just amazing, unparalleled in history anywhere else. So I respect that oral tradition greatly. I feel very proud that we had such oral tradition, but without forgetting that on the side was Buddhism in a different language with extremely complex philosophical ideas, and Jainism, for instance, aparigraha, an idea that Gandhi accepted, comes straight from the first flush of Jaina texts. From the 8th century compilation of the Jaya to the 2nd century before Christ compilation called Mahabharata is another 600 years. And in between comes a contact with Greece, whether Indians impacted the Greek poets and they created epics, or whether Greeks impacted Indians and they created epics, is a futile kind of charcha. Futile charcha. Because it adds neither to a knowledge of the Greek epics nor to the knowledge of the Indian epics. But some similarities are, for instance, the character that Bhima kills with using Gada is made invincible. It's completely immune to any attack, except for one small portion of the body. And Krishna tells Bhima ki aapka jo Gada hai, Gada Yuddha is the mode chosen by Bhima in that particular combat on the 15th or 16th day of the war. He chooses to hit precisely there, absolutely to the point. And then Duryodhan dies. Achilles' heel is, Achilles was dipped in the Tigris, Euphrates, whichever that river is, and whatever the river is, and but for the heel, and therefore the Achilles heel remained there as vulnerable part. These similarities are not coincidental. Setting aside all these similarities, I am trying to say that after 600 years of the first retelling of all that happened between 1400 to 800 had to be told, and the lines had blurred, memories had faded, and many new things had happened. I mean, it's almost like telling a story 1200 years after it had happened. We are in 22, and supposing we were to tell a story about India in year 1000 or 1100, we would be fumbling actually. We don't know whether Mira was given poison in a glass was or glass, glass कांच का पेला या brass का पेला या or मिट्टी का पेला. We know that she had to drink poison. Because history, as we understand history, had blurred for the man who compiled the Mahabharata. He had to invent various methods in compiling what he was doing. That compilation came to about 1 lakh lines, and it remained in oral tradition. Very often that got written, handwritten, produced in manuscripts after every 3, 4, 5 generations. Yet it remained at manuscript level till Mr. Bhandarkar set up the Bhandarkar Institute, and 3 generations of editors lavished their editorial care and finally produced the 18 volumes of the Mahabharata. So if somebody says, when was the Mahabharata written? The clear answer is, it was written in the 20th century. It was, I mean, that's a factually absolutely correct answer, and for that they had to take help of about 1100 different manuscripts, not one matching with any other manuscript. So if you read the Bhandarkar Mahabharata, you will notice that there is a nasate bhavato vidya na bhavo vidyate sata. 7 variations are there. And it says, well, the Patan manuscript has this, Sankheda manuscript has not vidyate bhava but bhavo vidyate, something like that. And the meaning change. Leaving that aside, let me go to this, the 1 lakh lines of the Mahabharata in the oral tradition there. Did Vyasa, in the first place, did Vyasa write it? Let me say yes, because there is a Krishna Dvaipayan, that is a man living on a dark island. And my friend Sri Aurobindo, I feel very close to him because I studied his works. And he said probably somewhere on an island. So did he come from the Andamans, or which island, or Dwarka Bet? Because that would be a very nice theory. Now, or was it just a dark hill somewhere? Genetics now says that there is a community in what used to be Andhra Pradesh earlier. Now it is split into, so many states have split into 2 or 3. I mean, these are splitting times for us. Vyasya is a community where no marriage has taken place outside the community for the last 3,000 years. This is what David Rick of Harvard Medical School has. So whether he was a man from, or a community from Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and who wrote the 1 lakh verses, is difficult to say, because this Vyasa is ascribed several other texts, not just there is Harivansh from Bhagavad. So this 1 lakh lines, but we have to be content with that. We cannot ask for greatest clarity on any of these things, and therefore focusing on that text of 1 lakh lines as if it is the Mahabharata, one can say so much, that, and I am repeating Sri Aurobindo. Aurobindo said, comparing Valmiki and Vyasa, Valmiki's Ramayana was written a century before the Mahabharata was written, while the war described is older than the war in the time in the Ramayana. But there's no problem, because now we're getting movies on Padmavati, whereas last some 50 years back we used to get movies on Jyotiba Phule, so or Savitri Phule. That is said a movie about a former time coming later, but a movie is a movie. These, Aurobindo says, comparing Ramayana and Mahabharata, Valmiki, the Ramayana, no, he says Ramayana is a greater poem, but Vyasa is a greater poet. Fascinating observation. Then he explains, and Sri Aurobindo, when he writes, paper was not so expensive in those days. Every sentence runs into 2 or 3 pages or something like that. Long sentences. Aurobindo says, if Valmiki observes something, he lavishes great labor on elaborating. Supposing Ram and Sita meet after a long gap and they look at each other, then Valmiki has 16 lines to describe how their eyes looked at each other. 16, not one less. And then, of course, the entire night passed like that. And then they said, the night is over, but the talk is not over. How? I mean, if Valmiki spent 16 lines on that, night is going to pass like that. Aurobindo says Vyasa is a greater poet. Vyasa does not stop at all in his descriptive trajectory. We have seen on television this Draupadi Vastraharan, which went on for 6 weeks. For Vyasa, it takes a single line. Believe me, in the Mahabharata of Vyasa, this is not. There are a few questions she asks, but those questions are not elaborate questions, not like the Hindi movies. They're simple. I mean, they are half a line or quarter line questions. Vyasa is a poet in a rush. Valmiki loves his poem, but Vyasa is not worried about his poem. Vyasa was worried about the time that he was trying to depict. And as a result, Vyasa is found in that poem not liking any of his own characters. If you look at how he said the characters, we like them. The story is fantastic. I mean, it's so heroic, so enchanting, so no length of storytelling of the Mahabharata will tire anybody. I grew up listening the stories from my grandmother or grandfather or mother or father, and every time my eyes shut, I said, please continue. And they continued. Generations after generation, people have done this. Vyasa is not interested in the characters. He is interested, and the most care that he has shown in depicting any character, it is not any of the Pandavas, any of the Pandavis, any of the women and the Bharata Vansha, any of the Kurus, any of the other Rajas, or any of other Ranis. He has been extremely attached to one character, and that is Yama. Now, where does Yama come in the story? Actually, he is not there in the story, but he is everywhere. There are 2 such characters, there are 2 such personas in the Mahabharata. One is Vyasa himself. Vyasa is there at the beginning of the story. I mean, Vyasa is asked to do wonderful things in giving birth to children, and Vyasa is there at the end of the story, saying that this is how it happened, and alas, this is how. And he says it when all the characters, except 2 of them, are around. and that is Dharmaraj and a dog. So Vyasa, Dharmaraj and a dog, that's the family. Now Dharmaraj is described both in Adi Parva and also in the last 2 or 3 books of the Mahabharata were super added afterwards, accretions. But even in the Sabha Parva, there is appearance of Yama, and therefore it is consistent with the that is in the middle of the one of the middle-ish book, and therefore the last book is consistent with that. Dharmaraj is the son of Yama, and that's why he is called Dharma. He has another name, but this is his grand name. Vyasa is devoted to that character because Yama, who in Vedic literature is an incestuous character. There's in Yami dialogue where both of them, and probably we have to, when we have more on ancient DNA, we will know if these migrations and mixing of men and women had anything to do with that. At the moment, we do not know. Maybe some Vedic scholars do know. Vyasa was interested in time. Yama and Niyama together form time. So this Mahabharata is a poem about time. And his greatest visible icon or symbol at the optical level of the Mahabharata is not so much a horse or a crown or a bow and arrow. The Ramayana has arrow and bow as optically most present, beginning with Dasharatha, going to the these twin children of Lavakush of Rama. Here, the optical center, the visual center of the Mahabharata is a chakra. And that chakra also is described as Kala Chakra. It is Yama's chakra. Yama is Kal. So it is the cycle of time that fascinates Vyasa. Not so many characters. He is trying to look at a vast spectrum of time, trying to encapsulate, compress it in the form of a story. Who is deprived of everything. First, his mother has killed 7 of her children. The 8th one remains there. He's very brilliant. He studied. He spent some time with his mother, and it's like a Govani child studying in Oxford or Cambridge, coming up. He's deprived of opportunity of getting married. Then he's deprived of opportunity of ruling, though he's the eldest. So he decides, when his time comes, to wait till Dakshinayan is over and Uttarayan begins. So I can wait for what? Wait. This Kala Chakra is the center of Vyasa's narrative. And his difficulty was that before him, a Buddha had happened, and before him, a Mahavir had happened. The second difficulty was that Sanskrit was not the only advanced language at that time. Tamil, or what we can call Proto-Tamil, had been around, and Tamil itself was fairly advanced by the time he was writing this. 3 philosophical languages, Pali, Prakrit, Tamil. 3 different philosophies, Jainism, Buddhism, and the Vedantic wisdom. If Vyasa had to make his story authentic, he had to make an utmost effort to not be seen being influenced by any of these. That is, if somebody is writing in the 21st century uh, and wants to be seen like a 14th or 15th century writer, like Tukaram or Namdev or Kabir, is quite a challenge. Vyasa manages it by inventing a metrical deviation, and that is a wonderful contribution that he made to poetic tradition in India. The Vedas had in them, Rig Veda particularly, 72 and a half meters. Ramayana tried to create a new meter, but Vyasa perfected that meter and made poetry easy to remember. The Vedic poetry, the Richas, are remembered, but those who remembered the Richas also had to remember the rhythm of the Richas, otherwise, the meaning would change. Whereas in Vyasa's case, he created a meter which, whichever way it was uttered, had ease of conveying the meaning that the lines contained. I'll not get into the prosody of the poem. Vyasa had to create something else, and that is, in order to sound credible, in order to give credence to this history of Jaya as history in times when it was almost forgotten, he had to invent, he had to generate, create, fabricate, conceptualize a new understanding of time itself. I mean, he did not go for what is history. He did not go for the question, what is history? He went for the question, what is time? And that's why his most favorite character, Kala, Yama. Vyasa's theme is not the war, the destruction caused by the war. That is the substance that he is using in the theme. But the theme was present time at 4 different levels. One is, call it a cosmic time. Again, cosmos is a Greek word. Vishwa, perhaps, but I'll not get into this jugglery with Greek words, Latin words, Sanskrit words, since I'm able to communicate what I want to say. A cosmic time where beginning is there before the beginning we know, and an end is there after the end we can experience. And therefore, Vyasa spends a huge portion of the second part of the first book in piling genealogy on genealogy on genealogies. In this little book also, I thought I should give a test of these genealogies. And he begins with creation of stars, then the animals come, then out of animals somebody marries a human. It's strange. But a much larger time. Then Vyasa also must have a history time. And for that history time, which is major time, measurable time, he has to say that children studied for so many years. They fought in year such and such. Then they went out and plunged for a kingdom for 1 year as on trial. The apprenticeship, they are on probation. And then after the probation is over, the blind king says, no, you cannot own this, you must move to the other department. So all that is timed in human time, in calendar time. And names of months, the nakshatras that will go with those months are all planted there to make it look like history time. 18 days, the war is fought for 18 days. 18 is a very favorite number for this poem. 18 days war. Then there was, when the Gita was added to it, it had 18 adhyayas and so on, so that they looked organically linked. I said I will comment on the Gita. Gita has the lucidity of verse that the Mahabharata has. Gita is easy to recite and apparently easy to understand, though not everybody understands the Bhagavad Gita. The Gita has added to it, super added to it, about 3 sections at the end, which deliberately talk about the social classes that the Mahabharata describes. The idea of punarjanma, the idea of gunas. If you don't perform your duties now, then next time, you won't have a good time, etc. All that. Uh, but the Gita leaves a little clue to its being super added, and that is कुरुक्षेत्रे धर्मक्षेत्रे समवेता युत्सः मामका पांडवाश्च किम कुर्वत संजय. What did he say? The Gita comes in the middle of the description of war in the Mahabharata as we know it today. In that description, the speaker would have said, well, this is happening. It is saying, what did happen at that time? That is a text which is written afterwards about that war. What did happen at that time was then placed within the war description. And this is a generally accepted view of the Bhagavad Gita. Yet, it is part of the Mahabharata as we know it today. And therefore, I accept it as part of the Mahabharata. I have no problem accepting it as the cosmic time, history time. Then there is, when Arjun, now I am talking within the Gita, about the Gita, and I'll give one more example. Krishna says, do you not believe in all that I say? Just look at this. And Arjuna says, a Virat Rupa, which is limitless, absolutely. And it's in one moment. It's one moment. And so it is not cosmic time. It is not historical time. It is the time in the consciousness. Like James Joyce's Ulysses. It's time in the consciousness. So there is the psychic time, psychological time in one's psyche. So there is this psychological time, there is the historical time, there's cosmic time, and there is a mythological time. And the mythological time is created by Vyasa by depicting every character as if it is not real, but as it is mythological. And therefore, it is difficult to say which of them are historically there, correct, verified or verifiable, which of them are purely mythological and therefore not historically true. In fact, it would be quite inappropriate to ask the question as to which part of the Mahabharata is history and which part of the Mahabharata is myth. Because Mahabharata is neither dealing with history as an order of things or myth as an order of things, but altogether a different order of things. And that order of things is Mahabharata is dealing with one's understanding of time and nothing more. That method of dealing with the past, dealing with time, has impacted Indians all through the centuries, and we continue to internalize that method, no matter to which tribe or which caste or which religion we belong in this country. No offense to any other religion, that it is, but it has become a second nature for us here, and that is why we turn living human beings into superheroes. I mean, somebody, let's say this desk is only 22 inches long, but somebody says it's 56 inches. We accept. They're giving superhuman shape. Uh, or somebody is working for, let's say, 12 hours a day. Then it's not, that person is keeping very close eyes on everything 24 hours a day. We learned that it is our undoing, but it is also in some of the mid 20th century English novels, like Raja Rao's Kantapura, for instance. Gandhi becomes a Superman because he's walking from, this with a stick and some 20, 30 followers or 60 followers from Sabarmati to Dandi. Gandhi is walking, becomes Superman. A Superman of innocence, Superman of purity. I mean, it can happen again also. We internalize it. We can't help. Now, Vyasa's greatness is in avoiding immediate impact of Buddhism, Jainism, Dravidism, remaining within the so-called Sanskrit sphere of knowledge, and yet inventing a completely new method of looking at the past, which is neither the mythic order nor the historic order, but order altogether different. And that I call the Mahabharata way of looking at the past. We are a nation, I'm not talking about the Constitution of India, which says India, that is Bharat, is a union of states. Physical states as well as mental states. I'm not talking about that. But we have been a nation when we were not this union of states, when we were probably so many chota kachara kingdoms. We were a nation. What else? Because history has trashed them. What history has trashed has to be described as trash. So we have been one people because we belong to this method of looking at the past. And the best comment on the Mahabharata is not about the Mahabharata. It is by Premchand. It's the opening of a story of Premchand. इस देश में किसके बाप ज़्यादा रईस नहीं थे. Everybody's grandfather is a great person. The Mahabharata method, the cosmic time, suddenly. Everybody's school teacher is a great yogi. Cosmic time. Anyway. The Mahabharata is unique. And despite our becoming modern, it allows us to carry that tradition, because that tradition of looking at the past is no threat to our being modern. Mahabharata is a wonderful work because it is neither myth nor an epic. Mahabharata, despite not being such a great poem as Sri Aurobindo said, shows the greatness of the poet. And I think this character Vyasa must be a fascinating character, whether it was a person or a community or an entire generation or a strategy making group of experts. What is it called? Think tank. But this think tank, this person has thought about time and the work and this history that it was trying to compress in such an organic way that being organic has become the highest civilizational value for us in South Asia. I feel very nice being here. If I die, I would like to die in this country. And whether I have Aadhaar card or no, I still would like to, because I have this kind of access to this kind of consciousness here. Thank you so much.